People in our own backyards are hurting. There are insecurities around food, economics, mental health, access to justice, healthcare, and our society continues to become more divisive. But there is hope. Right here in Chicagoland, there are people and organizations who are on the front lines, working to bring about positive and transformative change. Each week, we're going to meet some of these agents of change and examine how they are spurring innovative ideas and finding solutions to push our society forward in a more just direction. I'm Sufyan Sohel, and this is Change Agents. Good evening. America and our communities are more divided than ever. It is no longer just Republican versus Democrat or liberal versus conservative. It is the 1% versus the 99%, rural versus urban, the continued rise of white supremacy and nationalism both here and around the world. Climate doubters clash with environmental protectors. Our bathrooms have become battlefields and our borders are more chaotic than ever. Sex and race, ethnicity and faith, are our communities still ones that embrace the concept of a melting pot, or are those the lines that now causes conflict? Fighting for justice, accountability, and reform is not new to us. We have fought for hundreds of years and we know how to fight, but so many communities are under attack, and it is more imperative now than ever before for us to stand in solidarity and support one another. To help us understand this, I am so pleased to welcome my first guest tonight, Pushkar Sharma, the founder and executive director of Parallax Policy and an absolutely brilliant international peace and security specialist with over a dozen years of experience in the Middle East, Europe, Asia, and Latin America, and who is working on some incredible initiatives right here in Chicago. Pushkar, thank you so much for joining tonight.
Thank you so much.
Of course. We're going to start with one of those policy pieces that you're pushing back against, actually. The Illinois State Legislature recently passed a resolution creating an Indian American Council. But after reading it, you and others saw that it wasn't quite just an Indian Advisory Council. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I guess it's one of those things where the devil's in the details, where at the highest level it sounds like perhaps it's a good idea, but then when you literally read the paperwork and read the details of it, you see there are a number of alarming issues raised in it. But before I go into that, I think it might be helpful just to kind of widen the lens and just give a little bit of kind of the historical context of what's happening.
Sure, please.
So, I mean, we know this. Martin Luther King Jr. Went to India in 1959 to study the nonviolent movement and Mahatma Gandhi, right? And so if you were to say that the linkage between the US and India, I'm Indian American proudly, the heritage there that links the countries, I think, is based in the two largest democracies in the world and based on the nonviolent movements of King and Gandhi, right?
Sure.
As a small Chicago side note, King, when he came back from India, he actually wrote in Ebony magazine, published in Chicago, about his trip to India and kind of his impressions of Gandhi and the nonviolent movement. And so for me and for many of us who are Indian Americans, I was born in Chicago, we take pride in that history, right? The history of equality, of civil rights, of human rights, of a place for every person, no matter who you are. And that's what we hope to lead with when we talk about that relationship with India and the US. But in recent years, in the 21st century, let's say in the last 5 years or so, we see increasingly kind of this component in this part of the US, which is about, let's say, those with power trying to squeeze more and more power, right? Economic power, political power, whatever, and to marginalize the marginalized even further, right? And so this has been, I don't know, epitomized by a president or two recently, who really say, somehow have flipped the script on what civil rights mean and have tried to marginalize and reduce voting rights, for example, and otherwise. So similar dynamics happening in India, and that network is very clearly connected here in Illinois as well. Steve Bannon is very famous, recently indicted in multiple cases. He's been somebody in the U.S. who's put forward a language of what some, I would argue is a violent extremist language that, caused something like January 6th to happen. So that kind of rhetoric, that kind of ideology of the country is only for one race of people, et cetera, was invited to Chicago, actually, in 2019 for an organization in Carroll Stream, Illinois suburb that is, I don't want to, if I should name names or anything like that.
Please, no. Go
But
ahead.
just to say, this organization is one that has a similar ideology in India.
Okay.
And it's an Indian American organization based in the Chicagoland area.
Sure.
So it really started to show many of us, 2019, that it was kind of a linking of these supremacist ideologies. That those powerful people in the country of India and here in the US want a supremacist vision of those countries. The country is only for us, and minorities can live on the side and the margins, right? And so to bring it home, back to this piece of legislation, we saw a number of these kind of, let's call it that ideology, actually written into this law, which was passed by the Senate, the House, and signed into law by the governor.
So thank you for sharing that. And I want to talk a little bit about what you just said about people on the margins.
Yeah.
Why is there such a push for some to stay in power and push others in the margins? What's the risk of everyone being elevated and everyone succeeding and having access to justice and rights and financial security and food, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah. I mean, this is something that we're seeing happen across the world in many many countries and many contexts. We see it happening here. We see it, for example, if you look at Brazil. It's a very famous kind of case. If you look at like Hungary, India, obviously the Philippines, where people who are, you could argue, dictators or wannabe dictators, start to think that let's restack the deck. Let's try to squeeze out the most we can get. I think it's a question of, human greed, frankly. And oftentimes they say, well, the leaders, these kind of authoritarian dictator types, they think, let me blame, this group or this minority group and get everyone's attention looking on that, while in the back room, I'm raiding the kitchen, I'm taking more money, and I'm rewriting the rules so I can be in power multiple years, or there's no term limits. So you start to see that happening. You see this kind of alliance happening of many of these dictators or wannabe dictators happening around the world, where they see that they can continue to squeeze and take more and more of the pie and leave people with less and less. It's a phenomenon we're seeing right now.
So would it be fair to say that by creating more of this divisiveness amongst different groups of people, they're able to hold on to their own power in some ways?
Definitely. And I think it's very important to mention kind of social media here, because this is something that we're seeing, unregulated social media, where you can have a lot of disinformation be put out. So certain countries that you have these leaders, dictator wannabes, who are putting out all of this, garbage news, and it's creating the further divisions that you're describing.
Oh, thank you. December 10th.
Yep.
Tell me this signifies a big day. We're celebrating something big. We just did on December 10th, 75th anniversary of something.
Yeah, exactly. So December 10th is International Human Rights Day.
Okay.
And this, from December 10th, 2022, it starts to mark 1 year of the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And so just a little bit of context on that. Basically, it was drafted in part by Eleanor Roosevelt, First Lady of the U.S., and actually signed in San Francisco. So it's a document that I think is really deeply American in a lot of ways. But it's kind of like the legal framework for the entire world. And it's an amazing step for history that says, for the first time, everyone in the world, through the United Nations, acknowledges the equality of all people. No matter what your nationality is, no matter what your race is, no matter how much money you have, no matter what your language is, and no matter what gender you are, no matter what your orientation is, any of those things, it doesn't matter. We're all equal. And it's this massive step in human history, and we're celebrating that now. The 75th anniversary of the signature of that.
That's fantastic. But in reality, what we're seeing is something very different, right? And not everyone is treated equally. We see many forms of segregation across different identity lines all the time. So what are some steps in the few minutes we have left that people can take to try to address some of this divisiveness and lack of solidarity?
Yeah, no, I think solidarity is the key question. I think we've been fortunate. I and many others have been working together. In 2 years ago, in December 2020, we actually at the city council level passed a piece of legislation acknowledging International Human Rights Day and kind of demonstrating to the city and the people in the city that law matters. Every person is equal, and might does not make right. Just because you're in power powerful doesn't mean that you can stomp on everybody. That people can really they should be pressing for equal rights constantly. So that was one step we were able to take. You talked about this Illinois Indian American Advisory Council, which we've been working together in a broad coalition across the South Asian community to say that, hey, listen, we're all in this together. Why do we need a segmented piece that is just for one group? We should be building across the Asian American community in solidarity and to try to identify issues that exist in the community related to economic equality, kind of, let's call them caste equality, issues that the community is facing in the state and across the country, and to say, let's come together to address these through the government, in forms of that. So our organizing efforts have been seeking to build alliances, solidarity across communities, and not just only in the Asian American community, but broadly across, people of color, as well as, let's talk about issues facing people of different classes as well. And these are fundamental issues that face our community, that face all communities, and working together is so important.
Such great work. Pushkar, thank you so much for all that you do. Thank you so much for sharing your insight and your expertise with us. We'll be right back with our next guest.
The players, the politics, the problems, and the people. Political Forum offers local legislators and political newsmakers an opportunity to participate in a one-on-one interview to discuss the most important political headlines in Chicago. Join us for Political Forum Wednesday at 7 p.m. on KNTV 19 and streaming at knTV.org. The world is watching Chicago. Chicago is watching Political Forum.
Welcome back. I'm ecstatic to introduce my next guest, Priya Shah. She's an artist, an entrepreneur, a model. Priya is the founder of The Simple Good and co-founder of the South Asian Solidarity Movement, a change agent who believes in the power of good and standing up and speaking out for our most marginalized. Priya, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Priya, you're amazing. I read your bio. You have your hands in so many different jars, and you're doing a lot of good. And I was at your event a couple of weeks ago where you had this wall up asking people what their simple good is. And before I share mine, I want to ask you why the simple good? Why is that concept so important to you?
It was really inspired by my travels around the world. I did a lot of poverty alleviation work in a lot of diverse countries. I was in India and South Africa and Brazil and all these different places that seem very different. But what I learned was that I was able to connect to every walk of life, no matter where I was, through that fundamental element of good in our lives, right? It was this gesture of a smile or an act of kindness or a story of hope that connected us to anyone that I met, no matter where I was. And that's also the same thing that uplifted us and allowed us to overcome any hardship that we did face. And I think that a lot of the times division is created because we think that our values are really different. But the understanding of this universality of good is truly what connects humanity and will allow us to thrive and develop. And I felt like this was such an important understanding that we have forgotten and lost. And that's really why we find ourselves in a lot of challenges that we see today. And I just wanted to elevate that conversation so we can move towards the positive.
Why do you think it's lost? Why is this concept of doing good for one another, loving one another, showing compassion to one another, why do you think we are losing track of that?
I think kind of what you guys were talking about earlier, division is really created through power and dividing us. And how do you divide us? It is through a loss of love. Love is the biggest building block and connection that all of humanity has. That's what creates new people, right? It's what really allows us to develop as human beings and understand our purpose. But when you lose that, when that's taken away, and any medium to actually facilitate that is taken away, that's when you create lost individuals that you're easily able to control and divide and also take power from. And so I think this is a very scripted, thing that we've used in the history of humanity to take control of people. And we need to reconquer that and understand truly what is the power of goodness and humanity and hope. Because when you hold on to that, no matter what people do, you can't overcome that.
I agree. And thank you for that. We're going to come back to Simple Good, but I want to talk a little bit about the South Asian Solidarity Movement. We had Pushkar here a little bit ago talking about some of the divisions we're seeing both within South Asian communities and outside of it too. Can you tell about maybe some of the inspiration behind creating the movement and what you hope to accomplish?
Yeah, so this was a long time coming, and it was a very serendipitous way that it came together. I've run The Simple Good for 10 years now.
Congratulations.
And thank you. And a lot of it was inspired by my travels, but through the journey of founding and starting a nonprofit, it is very challenging if you don't have support in many different ways. And I found that my own people, South Asians, were the least contributing to my community work.
We're terrible.
We kind of suck, you know? And I just felt like it was so ironic, right? We're one generation away from poverty. Many of us have seen our parents struggle, and we've struggled ourselves coming to America as immigrants. And now we are the first generation into extreme privilege, and we don't contribute, we're the least contributing group of people. And I think that was such a huge irony that hit me, that made me really want to talk about this and address it. And it comes from a lot of different facets, right? It's post-colonialism, it's colonialism, this colonialism rhetoric that we still actually subscribe to, even though we live in the diaspora. And I think that it was not only about me having us have conversations that were deep and reflective, but it's about us also taking action and in making an investment towards communities outside of our own. It's very typical for us to give to the cow in India or the school in India or the temple, but we don't really invest in Black and brown communities, but we do benefit from them. And I really think that it's a time for us to shift and invest in a different way. And I came across my co-founder, who's Sindhu Thomas, who was already doing DEI work, and it was kind of a unique collaboration of bringing these two different realms of equity work together to really inspire some stronger action.
Great. So many questions. I mean, growing up South Asian myself, right? Values that I saw in my communities were colorism, casteism, socioeconomic differences, right? Education. I was told not to play outside when I was young because I would get too dark and who's going to marry me, and et cetera, et cetera.
Fair and lovely.
Fair and lovely, yes. Skin lightening cream. And I guess why do you think our communities struggle to see that we're all being targeted, and it's so important for us to stand and support with one another? But rather than doing that, we're okay of pushing other communities aside as long as we're able to progress.
I mean, I don't think there's an easy answer for that, but I do think that one big culprit is colonialism. Like, we became very white adjacent from the British, meaning we aspire to be like them.
Sure.
And I think that you can also see that in South Asian leadership right now, namely one that's in the UK. That's really not actually learning from our past and doing good for others. It's actually operating just like their colonial conquerors had, And I think that we're doing that not only in the governmental level, we do that in corporate level, we do that in a community level, we do that within our own Indian community where we talk about colorism. And I think that we have to really unpack how do we get here, right? And I think sometimes we use religion and all these kind of rituals, and it's a tool to justify this. But if you actually look at the history of India, there was no true religion, until the British came, and that's because they didn't understand how people coexisted, how Hindus and Muslims really believed in each other's religions, and how we really lived in peace with each other. And I think we have to go back to that and really understand that history so we can understand how we got here.
I love that. And I remember growing up, we would celebrate all the Indian holidays, right? And I feel now there's tension between some of that. And if you don't lean into some of your own ideologies only, there's problems. Talk about methods that communities can stand up and support one another. What sort of actions are you encouraging your constituents and broader communities to take to support others?
I think first up, it starts with listening to each other with a true empathetic ear. The reality is Chicago is a very segregated city. So there is a high likelihood, we really don't understand each other's experiences because we don't coexist. We live in our different communities and we don't really see the challenges that we all face. Rather, we make assumptions and also listen to the media through those assumptions. So I think that us really going into different communities and really being a part of them, right? And learning about how do I connect to somebody? What is their simple good that I connect to, right? And then secondly, investing in communities outside of our own, really going, not only giving to other nonprofits that are actually doing critical work and understanding why that critical work needs to be done in this community versus yours, but also investing in businesses that are also uplifting and advancing economies of color that wasn't invested in before. And I think as South Asians with such privilege, with such economic privilege, a lot of the things that we complain about, such as the violence or corruption, we can actually fix if we are invested in doing that.
Absolutely, I agree. Well, let's go back to the simple good. And I resonate a lot with what you said. And one of the main purposes of creating even this show was so we can educate each other on all the different issues facing our neighbors, right? We all live in tunnel lanes, sometimes in our own bubbles, and don't know the realities other people may face. And I see a lot of that in the work you're doing with the simple good. You're trying to reach out to children whom others may have ignored. But can you share a little bit more about what you're hoping to accomplish with your work and what you actually are doing?
Yeah, so what we do is we partner with different schools and nonprofits to deliver social emotional learning based arts residency programs for either a semester to a full year. So we're ingrained in the community by bringing our teaching artists, our curriculum, everything that we need to get the program done, including the supplies to the final showcase. We bring it to the communities and we work in the community. And our goal is to teach our students how to explore different notions of the simple good within ourselves, around the world, and in our communities to really understand how these small things make an impact and how it really connects to everybody. And by doing that, we allow our students to, one, understand themselves better, understand their possibilities so that they can set goals to truly live a path that is true to them and not what anybody else says. And two, we also allow our students in the larger world to connect to our communities, right? That we're all human and that we all have capacity of good. And it is a responsibility for all of us to support each other. And when we do this, when we connect different simple goods to each other, we're facilitating cross-cultural dialogue. We're really building empathy in a really truly meaningful way that nobody can ever disregard. What I do for the final showcase is actually pre-pandemic, which we'll start up doing again, is we brought students into corporations and different galleries to host showcases. And that's also how we're also to bring two different types of worlds together, a corporate and underserved community, to bond on their simple good and their artwork. And that, connection will never leave.
No, and just the understanding increases tenfold. That's so great. You're also creating a documentary.
Yes.
Can you talk about that?
Oh my gosh, what a journey to do that. So it's called Building Hope. It's basically the journey of myself and my partner in Rwanda, how we brought the Simple Good program from Chicago to post-genocide Rwanda. And we built a school there. And that led to a huge journey of us understanding ourselves and what it really means to support children as we try to heal. We also end up healing ourselves as well. So my partner was a former genocide survivor, and I had to really confront my history with my mom living in East Africa and Uganda and being a part of the South Asian exodus, and me confronting my identity of how, my community has treated me as being a South Asian, being born with one hand, being a woman, and defying a lot of expectations, which prevented them to think that I could ever do anything in East Africa. And to be welcomed by communities that are written off and marginalized in this way was a profound revelation for me as well. And so this film really tells that story of what this work really challenges you to do, which is really understand yourself.
I love it. Where do you have time how do you wake up every day and work on all these incredible things? What keeps you energized to keep going day after day?
I think this is all just a blessing, right? We don't know what our time is going to be on this earth. Absolutely. And I want to receive all these blessings, as much energy as I can. And I hope that my investment in time in building these things will benefit somebody else, and allow others to keep this work going, because this shouldn't end with me, right? And it should continue and ripple effect beyond me, even when my time is done. So I think I'm just really feeling blessed that I can do all this stuff and be at the capacity to do so.
Thank you, Priya. I feel really blessed that you joined us today and shared all your great work, and I hope you continue to have the energy to keep on going.
Thank you.
Of course. This conversation left me so inspired, and I hope it helped us all think of our own simple good. We'll be right back with this week's Change in Action. Welcome back. In this week's Change in Action, I am pleased to introduce you to civil rights activist and community leader, Gerald Hankerson.
Hello, my name is Gerald Hankerson, and I am the Outreach Coordinator at the Chicago Office Illinois chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations, CARE Chicago. So my work at CARE really centers on just bringing the community together, definitely understanding the dynamics of how Islamophobia impacts the Muslim community. It's more important than ever to make sure that inclusivity and equity is all present, especially when we're talking about our civil rights, civil liberties, and social justice and human rights issues. You know, a lot of times the people are just scared to come together or face some hard truths, whether they need to change something, how they see other people, how they do things. And that, I think, to me, from time to time, it makes it where I have to be constantly present so I can understand what's changing with the times. I've been doing this role for quite a long while. I particularly center in on the promote tolerance part because, you know, when you really look at tolerance, you know, the actual meaning, it does not necessarily give a connotation like you're really willfully and in some ways eagerly taking to befriending and appreciating someone because of their differences. So, you know, defending civil rights, that's not limited to those who identify as Muslim. So that literally can be anyone, which really drives a lot of our solidarity allyship work. And that's something I think it brings about much needed conversations that other times would be non-existent. I think a lot of people misunderstand our organization at times because they see the words American Islamic and they think, oh, you know, this is about the Muslim community throughout the world. So no, we focus particularly on our local Muslim communities. We have over 30 chapters across the country. And there is, even within our organization, the effort to really express, we defend the rights of literally any person that identifies as Muslim. So, you know, someone can be Sunni or Shia, someone can be Ahmadiyya or 5%er or a Nation of Islam or even Sufi, right? There's no distinction for us because we're not a religious organization. We're not, you know, trying to pass certain edicts or things like that. It's literally defending our First Amendment right for freedom of religion. So if you want to join us, by all means, please go check out carechicago.org. That's CAIR Chicago.org.
As our world becomes more divisive, it is up to each of us to stand up and proclaim that we will not sit idly by as those around us face hate or injustice, that we will not sit quietly as our neighbors suffer, and we will not wait for others to bring about the positive change that we all hope for. As we wrap up our first half of our first season of Change Agents, I want to thank each of you for joining me on this wild adventure of learning about some of the biggest challenges facing our communities and meeting incredible leaders working to bring some good to the world around us. I am so very grateful for all the Change Agents who joined me each Thursday night and shared their love and passion with us all. President Obama said, "Change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time." We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change that we seek. I leave you all in 2022 by reminding us that we can all be change agents. Let us all be change agents. Wishing each of you and your loved ones a very happy holiday season, and I look forward to seeing you all in the new year.